morning, everyone, at least from my part of Arizona. We have two guests today, and I'm really excited about this series. This is a new series we're doing. We want to showcase our workers, our global workers who have committed to missions, who have committed to obedience to the Lord's calling. And I can promise you today, you're going to hear some pretty powerful movements of God at work. So don't leave early. Don't try to catch the recording. Stay with us live. First of all, before I go further in some instructions to our audience, I want to say hello, Russell and Ramona. I'm so glad you're here. We will be launching into questions with you, and we're going to dig into, oh, look at that. We've already got someone joining us. We've got Ermi watching from Manila.
Hi.
So welcome. That being said, everyone who's watching today, if you have comments or questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. We will see them. Don't worry that we moved on to another subject matter. We will get to your questions. We will pivot and go back. So let's just dig into it. I'm really eager to unpack this. Welcome, Mary, from Southern California on Facebook. All right, so let's start with the basics. How did you both become believers?
Well, I'll go first. Hi, everybody. I don't have a dramatic conversion story. I was raised in a Christian family, and I entered a personal relationship with Christ when I was very young. But when I was 17, I attended a summer camp, and that's when I really knew I wanted to give my life 100% to the Lord. In fact, the speaker was always asking people to raise their hands or come forward, but the night that I wanted to respond, he didn't do either one. So I couldn't even get up and run around or show my commitment. And it was after that I started reading my Bible more regularly and grew greater in my faith.
Awesome. Go ahead.
I'm the son of missionaries, and so it was at one of my dad's speaking engagements talking about missions that I gave my life to Christ and realized for sure that I was now going to be with Jesus in heaven when I died.
Awesome. So when you were considering serving overseas, what obstacles or challenges did you encounter in the process of making that decision, and how were they resolved?
Well, I had the privilege of going to a seminary, a really good seminary in Denver. And it was during that time that I began to consider being a pastor in the United States. And so for me, it was this long history of mine that I was a missionary kid, but now I was thinking about being a pastor in America. And so it was kind of a conflict going on in my mind, in my heart, which should I go for? And it was in a counseling session with an author by the name of Gordon MacDonald, who said, listen, Russ, we've got a lot of pastors graduating, very few missionaries. So I'd suggest you go for the mission field. And that was kind of a confirming thing for me. And that's how I came to make that decision.
For me, I was a short-term missionary in the Bahamas and after college. And my motivation for going was, why not? Why not go? And so that's why I went. So when Russ came home from seminary and said, I feel really God is confirming that we should be overseas workers, I knew that I needed more than a why not to say yes to that. And so I prayed and asked for my own personal confirmation that the Lord was leading me. So that's how it happened.
And that was, what year was that?
73?
Yeah, maybe 72 or somewhere in there.
So you've been in missions for quite a long time.
Mm-hmm. 47.
But I love, go ahead.
We,
What did you say?
We were appointed in 1973 with WorldVenture, which was under a different name at that time.
Awesome. Yeah, and I loved your attitude right there, Ramona, the why not? I that enthusiasm, like, let's just go. So tell me about in the 70s, how well known were missionaries and missions during that time among the churches and students? And what was the attitude towards missionaries back then?
Well, the attitude generally was very, very positive, and they felt like missionaries were somebody they wanted to have in the church and speak to the whole church. And so we were very much welcome in those days.
Awesome.
It was the high, I'd say,
And-
the heyday of missions, in churches.
That's great. Yeah. And we'll be unpacking some more stuff here. So what would, with them being so enthusiastic and supportive about missions, describe what partner development or fundraising was like for you in the 70s, and how did you see God at work through it? I mean, we've had over the years, methods of communicating the need for missions has changed. Obviously, now that we have social media, it's really changed. So what was it like for you raising funds?
Right. In some ways, it was easier, I would say, than it is now. Our son and his wife spent 7 years in India recently, and their support raising was totally different than ours. They had like 50 individuals and maybe 5 churches. Well, in the 70s, WorldVenture had regional offices, and so we are from the Northeast. So we had a secretary in that office who actually scheduled us in churches. She did the scheduling for us. And in many cases, the churches in a region like in Maine that had smaller churches would partner together and have what they call a round robin. And so there would be like 5 of us that would be going to that area. And within 5 churches, we rotated around those 5 churches every night in a different church. And then, the other 5 were also rotating around. And so that was a big help. And we really got to know people, in our support raising that way. A lot of traveling, but we were able to keep it on the Northeast side, whereas Russ's family had support all over the country, because that
my parents were missionaries going out.
Mm.
And then they had Sunday
That's
night
great.
services. How many churches have a Sunday night service? And that was
There's still a few. There's still a few that have Sunday night services, but some of them have tweaked it to now it's mostly like our church once in a while does a Sunday night hymn sing,
Mhm.
or they still have Sunday night, just not everybody.
Right. That was a popular time for missionaries to be scheduled as well.
Well, and as Ramona said, that back in those days when we had these round robins, they would have missions meetings every night of the week.
Unheard of today.
Well, that sounds exhausting.
For the church people, they were having a different missionary come every night.
Right.
They were coming out. So.
And how did you see God at work through your partner development or fundraising?
Well, definitely the support came in less than a year. And that's kind of unheard of in many cases nowadays. And it was wonderful. Yeah. I think his background, and we had strong church connections, and our seminary years in Denver, we had some churches there. So yeah, it was very positive for us.
Yeah.
Scary, but positive. I mean, I had a 2-year-old and, going to churches, and I remember one house we had dinner in, and her furniture was all white and her carpet was fluffy white. And I'm bringing a 2-year-old in thinking, can he touch anything? I need to be so careful. You're just really conscious of being in homes.
Yeah, sometimes that's still a struggle with some of our young families, because it's like I have a 2-year-old, I have a 3-year-old. I've heard those stories before, and I can't imagine having white anything in my house. I don't have kids, but I have a cat. So,
right.
So tell me, let's talk about how you served with WorldVenture and what you did. You can go into greater detail here.
Well, I guess I would say we started out in working with the missionary family, working with missionary kids. We went to Faith Academy in the Philippines as boarding home parents, that is, taking care of kids that had to board to go to school. And then I became the administrator of the boarding program, and I began to have some contacts in other missionary kids' schools. And so we started working together on how to do the best job we could for missionary kids. After a while doing that, I was asked to be the field director for our Philippine field. at that time we had 60 or 70 missionaries on that field. And so that gave me lots of experience relating to the national church, the Filipino church in the Philippines, as well as helping us work together well with them. After that, I began working with this organization called International Partnering Associates, IPA, and that got me traveling much more, developing partnerships among mission agencies.
You know, they say people change careers every 10 years, and it almost like that, four different roles in 47 years, you know, so that was kind of interesting.
Wow.
For me, yeah.
So,
Well,
go
for
ahead.
me, I really felt like God wanted me to focus on raising our family first. But because we were at Faith Academy also, of course, I was sucked into the culture of the school, and being boarding home parents, we kind of 24/7 with our own kids. In our first term, I was either having a baby or pregnant. And so for 4 years, we had number 2 was born, number 3 was born, and I was pregnant with number 4 when we left for our first home assignment. So I was feeling, you know, overwhelmed with that aspect and feeling like I was living in a glass bowl, being in a boarding home. And I learned that that wasn't for me. So we'll tell you that more about that later.
Sounds great. Yeah, I couldn't even imagine traveling while on home assignment while pregnant. So tell me, what during your first year overseas, what did you both struggle with, and how did you overcome those struggles?
Well, I think the feeling of being in a glass bowl, and I was raised. My father died when I was 5, and so my mom raised 3 girls, and she had to work, and I felt like that motivated me to never do that to my children. I didn't want to have to work full time, and then becoming a missionary, it was like it was work full time in the first year. So I just through a process of prayer, and after that first term, Russ was able to go into administration, so we had our own separate home, and I just was able to, I mean, I really thought of mothering as a career, and it was very, very fulfilling. I have heard mothers say, I'm bored, you know, I don't know. And I just tired of talking baby talk to all day. But, you know, for me, it was very fulfilling and challenging, and used all my skills. And I think it prepared me well also for the next phase of ministry that I was able to do in my latter years.
And what was that next phase of ministry after motherhood?
Well, I got into 2 different ministries, which I can talk about a little later if you want.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds
But
good.
I think Russ had his own part of that. What were your struggles?
Oh, yeah, my struggles during the early years on the mission field, I was coming back to the same mission field where my parents had done missions for 30 some years. And so I didn't realize it while I was there, only when we went back on our home assignment. But I felt like I was trying to fill my father's shoes, who had a huge reputation among Filipino churches and Filipino pastors. But I wasn't working in a church directly in church planting. I was working in the missionary family environment. And so when we would have our annual mission meetings with all the missionaries together, and church planters would come and tell their exciting stories about people coming to Christ and churches starting, and I'd talk about these 20 middle school boys that we were trying to be parents for. And it just didn't sound quite as exciting. And I just felt that I think that I was not doing something very well, because my parents had this reputation, and I was trying to fulfill it, and it wasn't working. And so on that first home assignment, I found myself in counseling, and that's how I found out what my struggle was about, what was going on there.
And so that's good that you sought counseling to find to get a solution to work through, and you're in that. No, you know, when you're doing ministry, I don't think you're alone in having felt that. I think there's some that could feel that too, and we start comparing it to other ministries. Are we doing as
Right.
much? And we forget too that whether it's 20 or 2,000, ministry matters. I mean, the small stuff matters, the big stuff matters, and there's a value to it. So I'm glad you persevered.
Yeah, I think for me then, because he was coming home, all the missionaries that were still there when he was growing up were Uncle Al and Uncle Bill, and different. And to me, everything was strange and new. He knew the language, I didn't. So we were in totally different pages of adjusting. So it was huge. And I think that probably contributed to my struggles the first term, just finding a niche. And it took me, when you say first year, struggles of how many years, it's not really just.
Well, I put first year as just a simple guideline there. Because
yeah. So I guess we had a huge struggle when we were married 20 years, which was in 1989. And I noticed that Russ was not communicating and was distracted. And when I'd ask him, is there anything wrong? He would just say, pressure at work, and finally, it came out later, he told me that he was basically falling out of love with me and being very disappointed and discouraged about so many things. And he just thought, well, if an honorable way to get out of this mess that I'm in and the way I feel would be to plan my suicide. So there wouldn't be a scandal. There would be no note. It would just be an accident, car accident. And so he was planning this for a number of months. And so that there was one night, I'm telling his story, but there was one night that we were in bed and he was thinking, this will be the night. I got the car full of gas and I know where I'm going to go. And
I was going to go over a cliff. And Ramona that night was asleep, and I was in my dark world making this plan. And she really had no idea what was going on, because I wouldn't share it with her. I was trying to keep a very wonderful outlook out where everybody else could see. But inside, there was a different story going on.
The perfect missionary family, right?
That's right.
Yep.
Yep.
Well, the thing that happened during that night was, laying there, suddenly there was this razor beam of light that shattered the darkness that I had been in for months. And with that light came a voice that said, Russ, this is Jesus. I want you to know that I love you just the way you are in your suicidal thoughts. And I was just overwhelmed. I couldn't believe it, because I didn't think anybody in the missionary community would understand or have any sense of feeling that way. And then Jesus breaks in. He comes to me. He searched me out and told me that he loved me, even though I was at this desperate and terrible point in my life. And I thought, if he loves me that much, I just really can't take my life. Somebody's out there who desperately loves me. And I knew all of that because I'd been to seminary and all. I knew the theology of it, but experientially and existentially, it really hadn't hit through to me like it did that night. And so I couldn't pursue that thought. And the next day we had a big row, because now I didn't know what to do. I couldn't do what I had planned to do to solve this, what I thought would solve the problem, which of course wouldn't have solved anything. But now we were together, and I was going to have to be with Ramona and this woman that I put it in quotes, fallen out of love with. But so Ramona said, let's get some help. I said, I don't want to tell anybody about this. It would shame me in the missionary community. But eventually I said, there is one person working at the school who's a counselor. I've worked with him with some of the kids. I think I could talk to him. And when we went in and talked to him, he got out of his chair and he said, walked over to me. He opened up his big arms and he put his arms around me and just loved me like that. And he said, Russ, I can't believe this, but I love you, brother. And this time it was the same words that Jesus had said, but they had arms on them this time. And it was just a powerful thing that made me able to begin to talk about it to more people. And that was the beginning of a process that allowed us to seek Christian counseling help that eventually helped us move towards a more whole marriage again. It was a lot of work.
I wanted to add that around that time, there was a missionary who was teaching Myers-Briggs, which is a very familiar tool to help people figure out their personalities. But she was teaching it from a Christian point of view and from in the church, and how people who are introverts are considered less spiritual than other people because they don't speak up and they don't, contribute in ways that extroverts do, that kind of thing. But she also, of course, applied it to marriage. And we took that course with her, with some other people. And we began to see the three parts of building a marriage is understanding, accepting, and affirming. And I wasn't even at the understanding point, of understanding his different and he to me. We didn't understand our differences. So we had to move through that, and accepting him. You can accept something grudgingly, okay, yeah, well, that's just how she is. But the third one was affirming it, like rejoicing that we're different and that we complement each other. So that was a big life changer for us. And it just really, has been incredible that he's used this experience because we've become more real with each other, and our children have seen that. And being open and transparent is it's an important thing to model to others that we're not perfect, and so. And then also, I think the Lord we had to get through this to be prepared for the next levels of leadership that we moved into. And I remember that was at 20 years, and I remember our 25th anniversary in the Philippines. My Filipino friend said, well, you have to have a party. 25th is a huge year, and I'm thinking, it took us 20 years to get into this hole. Is it going to take us another 20 to get out? So I don't know if we're ready to celebrate something at the 25th, but she convinced me and helped plan this thing, and that usually Filipinos will repeat their vows and things. So anyway, at that event, we were able to share. We had enough healing to share where we were in our marriage and to rejoice really in what God has done. So that was a huge thing in our career, which changed so many things.
And you mentioned in your story, we're going to keep along this theme a little bit. You mentioned in your story that it had this story, sharing your personal experience like this. You shared it with others. What was the result of sharing this with others?
Well, oftentimes it just opened them up to talk about some of their issues. When sometimes we just need somebody to help open up the opportunity to talk about something with somebody else that understands because they've gone through some of the same things. And so we were surprised that we had opportunities to share these things. We
were part of 2 marriage growth groups that were all lay led, no professional. Question really, and we learned this question from Dennis Vogan. How is your marriage this week? And that's all you had to ask. And then.
And the 3 couples that we were in, we would spend the next 2 hours just talking about it.
And then if it came up, well, he did this and she did this, and then the other couples could, kind of be referees in the boxing rink. So, yeah. And then we had another group that one was with missionaries. And then there was another one with Filipino couples that we were part of. And I think, that helped. I think that was a catalyst too. And our children.
I'm so glad.
And our children, they refer to our lives, in knowing that we are as open as we can be.
Well, the whole process there allowed me to move away from a really distorted view of what a missionary should be altogether, got his life together and doesn't have any apparent problems, because that's why you go overseas, to share the perfect gospel with people who need you. And I found out I was the needy person. and the gospel had not really penetrated like it should in my own life. So it was a wonderful thing to be with other missionaries and other Filipinos who were working through our own discipleship process in deepening our relationship with Jesus so that our marriages could become more whole.
Those are such rich relationships too, when you're sharing those experiences with each other and supporting each other. I mean, I am so glad you shared that story, that your experience with that. And I hope those of you out there that heard it can relate in some way. We have so many people from the Philippines watching today. We have Ronaldo from the Philippines. We have others from Pennsylvania to California, different places. One says, "Love you both. You're an example of friendship and courage and commitment." That's from Gladys on Facebook. We have Toronto Baptist Ministries, Johnny, who says hi. And we have Mary, who was touched by what you shared. She thanked you for sharing your hearts. So thank you, everyone, for joining us on that. So let's continue unpacking your life story. And we're trying to fit an entire, how many years into less than an hour?
47.
47.
Yeah, there you go. 47 years. So what was it like raising a family overseas?
It was wonderful. Now, I know that that's not a common response from some people, and some missionary kids have a very hard time. I mean, I periodically ask our 4 sons, are there things about being raised in the Philippines that have been a challenge now, looking back? And they all, if they're honest with me, are saying that, it was a great place to be. In fact, one person in the US one time said, well, I might consider being a missionary, but I would wait till my kids are grown because I don't want to take them to another country, and I thought, wow, that was the best thing for us. In a sense, it probably protected them a little bit from the world, though, which is not necessarily a good thing. I remember on our philosophy on home assignments was the kids went to public school. Now, I don't know, nowadays, public schools are different also, but in our son's junior year in high school, it was on home assignment, and his first day of school, he was eating lunch alone because, he didn't know anybody. And then everyone finds out if you're from another country. And so then these other exchange students and other people who had been, in other countries, they started eating together. And when one boy asked Wade, "What does your father do?" And he said, "Well, he's a missionary." And the guy said, "Wow, he goes through the jungle killing people." He thought he was a mercenary.
Wow.
So it was positive.
I guess it matters on context on that word.
Yeah, it was a positive experience, really.
Good. Tell me about, as we move into the present or the past. I think this is a little bit more in the past and into the present, but you can tell me that. What is or was 180-degree ministries, and what did God do through you?
180 Degrees music team was started in 2001. I was 55 years old, starting a new ministry. It's now in its 25th year, and I'm just so blessed with how God has used it in raising up younger Filipino young people. It's a 2-year commitment, honing your music skills and learning about Muslims, how to reach Muslims. And then in a 2-year commitment, after the first year, we go to a Muslim community locally in the Philippines. The second year, we go outside the country, and using cultural exchange. And the whole time, it's not like a 2-week short-term missions that people sometimes do, you hear about here, because we were preparing them for 2 years because they had a music skill to share. So they did cultural dances, cultural legends, stories, singing. And then when the host said it was appropriate, we would share the gospel, but always in a Muslim context. So that was probably unique about that, is that it was a long commitment. Every Sunday that we would meet for 5 hours. That's a lot, big time. A lot of music, because we had to do the music with live band, and then the training and the our discipling program we named MAD groups, mentoring, accountability, and discipleship. So that was a very important core of our training. And from that ministry, after the first year, we were all volunteers. Then we had to get more organized, register it with the government, and hire people. And so we needed, income to generate. So the kids had to pay a certain enrollment fee, and then churches supported us. After the first year, we hired our first worker. Well, his name was Emmanuel, and he was just out of college, and he spoke Tagalog almost exclusively. And my Tagalog was not that strong. And so I remember sitting in the office with him, and I would ask him a question in English. He would translate it into Tagalog, then translate his answer from Tagalog back into English, and then, say it to me. So at first I thought, is he dim-witted, or, what's going on? Like, it's, taking so long. And then I realized this cultural and language thing was, a big thing. And he is now, Emmanuel has moved on. He caught the vision of sharing Christ with Muslims and being intentional. And he is now living in Doha, Qatar, and using his job to share Christ with international. So that's just one wonderful story. And many others have said 180 degrees changed their lives. And so we've gone back twice to the Philippines. And each time when I visit the ministry there, it's so gratifying to see how God is raising up younger people. And the new leader, Roselle, who took over after I left, is doing a great job. So that's what 180 degrees is.
Well, and we've got someone from 180 degrees. He says from batch 4, Sam Marquez.
Hey, hi, Sam.
Hey, Sam.
Oh, I have to say then that our last visit to the Philippines, Roselle, the director now, and myself took a boat to another island and met Sam, who is starting a similar ministry on his island. He's a pastor now. Thank you, Sam, for coming. Praying for you.
That's great. And you've got a lot of fans in the chat right now. And maybe even a new one here, Janet Abai, which is a dear friend of mine, who basically stated our obedience is what counts, when we mentioned the numbers in the past about how many comparison in ministry and the damage of that. But and she's absolutely right. But yeah, thank you for your encouraging comments, everyone, on this. So let's keep on going. Tell me about the Go team. Oh, wait, before you do that, we got Kyle from batch 5.
Hi,
Kyle.
Hey, you're a pastor now too.
So we got some 180 degreeers, people who have been part of the fruit of the ministry. So welcome, everybody. And so anyway, tell me about the Go team.
Okay. Well, I told her I was 55 years old when 180 degrees started. So that lets you know how old I am now. But when I was 65, we moved to another island to the south where more of the Muslims live. And our son was living there at the time. And we said 180 degrees was on its own. So, why not see what God had for us down there? So we started what we call Go Team. We had to change the name because we were not using music anymore. We were just using the focus of teaching about Muslim work, training, and having them experience Muslim ministry. And so it's a shorter program and it's less expensive. It's run by volunteers, so there's not a big cost to it. And in the South Philippines, there's less funds to really do big programs. So it kind of helped, So now we're in let's see, it's still going. It started in 2014. So that's 11 years, I guess. So it's very fun. And I don't know if JoJo's watching today. She said she would, Josephina, but she's been leading the Go team. And it's just been wonderful to see how God is continuing that ministry. Even when COVID started, I was saying, well, why don't we just take a break for a year? Let's just take an off year and, see what's going to happen. And she said, no, we need to keep going. I think God really wants us to do it. We'll find ways, and doing it virtually. And some of the young people had to walk a half mile to get a signal so they could get into the meeting and stuff, so it was a big sacrifice. But it's been a similar thing with one young lady is now in Laos teaching, and some of the young people, they really get it. They really get it. When you have this, in this case, it's a 9-month commitment, or 6 to 9 months commitment. And, they have enough time to really understand the need in the Muslim world and how they can reach them. So
that is so encouraging to hear. And you're going to say something, Russell?
I was going to say that don't let age think you are out of the game. At 55 and 65, Ramona, with the help of many Filipinos and the blessing of God, was able to start these programs for youth. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of an amazing testimony that God can use anybody at any time.
Yeah, don't give up.
Yeah, we wrote an article on our blog recently about that, about Gideon style missions. It's what it's called if you're looking for it online, everyone. But it talked about people going into their second season, their second careers or whatnot, or even people, other people who are just continuing like you into current ministry. Because I want to remind everyone, they're not retired. They are still doing all this stuff. They're still doing ministry. In fact, if you look at their ministry profile, we had them recently update it. So if you haven't seen it since yesterday, I would suggest you pop over, scan the QR code. I know some of you did. Thank you for that. Scan the QR code or click on the link if you're on our social media and you see the link, and go ahead and take a look. But there's still a need for what you're doing. But we'll get more into that. Tell me more about International Partnering Associates and how God is working.
Before he starts, I just want to say that both Go Team and 180 Degrees are special projects of WorldVenture. So you can always support them in their ministry.
Perfect. And we'll put that information on the blog later this afternoon when we put this recording up. So you can check back to worldventure.com and we'll get that information up for you to take a look at that. So go ahead, tell me about International Partnering Associates and how God has worked.
Yeah, that's something I didn't start being involved in until I was 50. And the purpose of this group is it's a very loosely connected group of people who believe that the need of the church is to be unified. If we're going to reach the world for Christ, we're going to have to be more unified as the body of Christ in order to do that. We have enough people, we have enough technology, we have enough money to actually do the job. But the missing piece is that we're not unified enough. We work in our silos, we work alone, and we don't attempt to see who else might be doing this or who could I work with in order to be more effective. One of the things that first got me going on this, when I heard the story from French West Africa, where IPA had a meeting and called together some of the workers there across French West Africa. And as people were introducing themselves and saying what they were doing, one said, I'm translating the New Testament into a particular language. And a couple people later said, I'm translating the New Testament into that very same language. And then a third person said the same thing, and they'd never met each other before. And as a result of that meeting and some training there, they said, we've got to get together and work this out. And so instead of 3 different people doing it at a slow pace, they put their heads and their efforts together, and they got the job done in much less time than it would have taken alone. And they spread their new translation much wider than if it had just been one person doing it. Mm-hmm. And so John 17:23, when Jesus said, Lord, Father, help them to be one like you and I are one, and the Godhead is one. That's a very high bar. And I think that that's one of the things we need to work on as a mission world, as an evangelical world, to work together and be more like Jesus and his Father work together. One of the stories that I love to tell is about a young man in the southern part of the Philippines who had been a part of a rebel group and came to Christ. And his group was part of the group that, although he wasn't a part of it at the time, that took Martin and Gracia Burnham captive for those many years. I think that must have been more than 10, 15 years ago. And Martin died in the process. He had been in one of our boarding homes at Faith Academy. And so it was something very personal in a sense. But as this young man came to Christ, not only did he leave his fanatical terrorist group, he became the leader of a peace movement in the part of the Philippines where we were working at the time, and bringing together Muslims, Christians, and the government, working towards peace. And then another aspect, he was involved in the translating of the Bible into the language of his people group. And it had gotten stalled, and it was translated, but the printing process was stalled. And as a result of some of his work and many other people together, we were able to get that Bible to the printing press. And then it was through him, because people from his fanatical group knew him. And when he came up with this book called the Al-Kitab, the Bible, he was able to get it disseminated among his people in a wonderful, wonderful way. And the story of change and growth in that young man, who was a very, very prickly young Christian when he first came to Christ, because he was still acting like the kind of terrorist kind of he had been. And so we're grateful that God changes people, and that they can then become agents of peace as well as change.
Yeah, it reminds me of that C.S. Lewis quote where I can't quote it exactly, but he talked about the coming into the washroom, getting clean clothes, and basically he's talking about transformation in that quote. But we come to Christ pretty much needing a lot of buffering to become the person that God wants us to be. And I believe it's a lifelong pursuit. So it's encouraging to hear how a terrorist became a believer, was a little bit rough in the beginning, but became this amazing leader. I mean, that is just a wonderful example of what God is doing. And you've got a whole bunch of fans in the chat. Norma De Jesus.
Hi, Norma.
Hi, Norma.
Eleanor Cordova.
Oh, yeah. Hello.
Jeweled Joe. And then there's Maria Josefina. I think that's your Josefina,
Yes,
isn't it?
Hi, Jojo.
Josefina. Okay, we were just talking about you if your ears are ringing. Of course, that's American slang, so sorry. All right, so let's keep on going. So while you did share, if you guys are just joining, there was an amazing story they shared of how God working in their marriage and their lives. You'll have to rewind and watch it later. But is there anything else you want to add of what you learned in your years of ministry in the Philippines that helps you today? Anything you want to add to that?
Well, I'd like to add another story from another country in Southeast Asia, where I and my Indonesian colleague we were working with IPA, trying to help people work together. And as we came into this country, we were asked by a group of pastors to help them figure out how to work together so that they could reach the Muslim people of that country. As we started into our training session, I realized right away that there was something wrong with me in that group. The way they were responding to my presence was very, very negative.
You were the only white person.
I was the only white person in the group. And come to find out, by that evening, my colleague, whose name was Rio, said, you know what's going on? You as the white guy are reminding them of some of their relationships that they had with other white missionaries when they were very, very young believers, many, many, many years before. As a result of that, we said, well, we can't get very far in this seminar on working together if there's this backlog of really bad stuff and bad relationships. And so what in the world are we going to do? We were going to call off the whole seminar, and then the Spirit of God reached into Rio's heart and Rio said to me, Russ, why don't we tomorrow do it differently? You become the missionary that these people are having trouble with, and let them express to you some of what is going on in their hearts. And I said, okay. And the next day, as they poured out their hearts, there was deep crying, real hard things that they were saying about how I, as that missionary, had treated them probably 25 years earlier. And it went around the room. Every pastor said something. And those things that they said were just heartbreaking. And it was very clear that I, as that missionary, or missionaries, it was multiple people. And
What were they saying?
one of the things they were saying, you used to tell me that I wasn't smart enough to go to seminary. And so just stay here at the village. And by that time, that man who was saying it had a doctorate in Old Testament studies. But another man said, I used to come visit you in your village, and I had to walk many miles to get to your place because you were doing disciple work with me. But when I got to your place, you would never let me inside your home. And I wondered for a long time why. And then I came to realize that you didn't trust me being in your home, that I might take something of yours. And he said, that developed in me a bitterness towards you, that you couldn't trust the person who you had led to Christ. And another person said, one night I came to your house in the middle of the night because my wife had just passed away from a disease. And I asked if I could borrow a hammer so I could build a very crude casket for her. And you said, no, you didn't trust me that I would bring my hammer back to you. And as I was hearing these kinds of stories, many of them, my heart was just breaking. I found that I was just loaded down with the pain and actually the sinfulness of what I, as those missionaries, had done, and the pain that these men were suffering. And finally, it was all over, and they said, Rio said, okay, now what do we do now, Russ? I said, whoops, wait a minute. We hadn't discussed this part of the process. Now what do we do? And the only thing that the Spirit of God put in my heart was I stood up, and they were in a circle around me by that time, and I looked at each one in the eye. I said, there's nothing I can do to correct all the sinful hurts that I've done in your lives. I said, would you forgive me for my sinful acts towards you? As soon as I said that, there was a concerted wail that went up from them. It was like they were just releasing all this stuff from within them. It was their own feelings and their sinful bitterness, but of course it was stuff that they had kept within themselves for years. And as they released it to God and asked for his forgiveness, and they came over to me and started praying, they put their hands on me and started praying forgiveness over me for what I had done to them as that missionary many years. And there was a huge coming together. Every single one of them prayed a prayer. And by that time, I was just so released and couldn't believe it. And when they were finished praying, they all started singing and joyful songs together, said, now we can work together. Help us learn how to do that. It was just an incredible once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Wow, that is amazing. Wow. Yeah, so wow, that is really an amazing story. And that is incredibly brave of you to stand in that position to take something that someone else did in order to help them release and move forward and forgive, and so they can be more effective as our brothers and sisters in Christ. Wow, amazing. Tell me, you're in areas where you've reached. Thank you, Lois. She wrote, how incredibly sad. Thanks for hearing those dear folks. How beautiful, how important. Thank you. So your ministry has probably reached some unreached people groups, Southeast Asia being a huge portion of unreached people groups. But a lot of our U.S. church folks, regular attendees and stuff, often get confused with that term, unreached people groups. So tell me, how define an unreached people group, and then if there's another story you'd like to share about that, about reaching them, you can go ahead and share it.
Well, this is not a real technical definition, but it helps me figure things out. It's a people group is a language and culture group of people who speak the same language, and they have little or no gospel presence in that people group, which means there's probably no Christians, no churches, maybe no Bible in their language, and there are just no workers who are trying to reach them yet. That's kind of a simple way for me to understand it. There are technicalities that can be talked about, but that helps me. And there are about, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are about 14,000 of those people groups left who still need the gospel to come to them. And when we think about being strategic with our gospel and mission work, it may be that those are the places where we need to think about praying. It starts with prayer before we can do anything to reach these people.
So I had one experience with 180 Degrees. On one of our meetings on a Sunday, we invited a group of Muslim youth with their imam to come and join us and have a kind of an exchange thing. And so we said, we want to learn what your 5 pillars are of Islam and how you worship. And then, we want to share back and forth. So we did some games and we did some kind of icebreaker things. And then they demonstrated the 5 pillars and how they pray with their prayer rug and carpet and where they face towards Mecca and things. And then it was our turn. So we had prepared the wordless book colors, and so we broke into small groups, one of them with one of our youth, and they shared the meaning of the wordless book and the different colors. And they didn't get to the last question, would you like to receive? But we said, this is what the gospel is. This is what we believe. And that was just a small thing, but it was very impactful. And we were invited to their worship area, not a mosque, but their community center or something. They had they gave more speeches to us, indoctrinating us in, Muslim beliefs and stuff. It didn't start anything long-term, but it was a seed, and we feel like that's how God can use us with seeds.
Amen to that. So what are the opportunities today for people to serve in the Philippines?
I would say the trend is really different than when we went out in 74. And I'm hearing from from 180 and Go Team that Muslims who are coming to Christ are now becoming leaders. And it used to be the Western missionary and the national worker, like what do we need from each other, and how can we help? Now it's like the national workers with the Muslim background believers who now are ready to take the leadership. So I would say much less need for us as we're seeing it and seeing the MBBs, go forward. But there's still a need for people in support ministries. So, the MK education, the training and all that. So I think we're running out of time.
We are getting close, but I wanted to end with how can people support the work you are doing now? You did update your ministry profile, but why don't you go into detail now of what those needs are?
Well, when we go to visit the field, we've been doing that every other year, and we don't know if we'll do it this year or wait another year. Just the cost of those trips. That's basically the only, if you talk about financial needs. Prayer needs would just be that we'll remain faithful and see the opportunities around us here where we are and helping our church with their missions focus.
Speaking of here where we are, that's one of the things that we are learning to readjust to America. We thought we were done kind of being cross-cultural workers, but we found out we had to bring out all our cross-cultural skills to try and adapt back to America again after 40 some years out of it.
Yeah.
And that the God is using us in different ways than we expected and the way we had planned our lives as we planned them out, which he most often does anyway. I think we're learning how to be his people as these so-called, we don't like the word retired, but we are tired, putting on new tires.
Yeah, that's a funny thing about, I've noticed about WorldVenture. You guys really don't retire. Your calling goes to forever. until you come to Jesus, and you just go into different seasons, it seems. And that is something I admire a lot about you guys and my WorldVenture colleagues, is how they are driven for the gospel. And that is just amazing and inspiring to me. So do you have something to add before we wrap up our time?
I would just like to make one comment about what are the opportunities today.
Sure.
If you are thinking that God would like you to work cross-culturally in another culture, come prepared to be a servant and with humility, taking your lead from, especially if you're going to the Philippines, taking your lead from Filipinos who are leading the charge in missions in many places. They are one of the wonderful harvest forces now, not a harvest field as much, more going out to different parts of the world. There was a program called OFWs, Overseas Filipino Workers, because Filipinos were going around the world. Every country of the world has Filipinos working there. And instead of calling them overseas Filipino workers, we now call them outstanding Filipino witnesses. And that's one of the wonderful things that they have done. They have created training process to help these OFWs become real agents of the gospel in the countries, the closed and difficult countries where many of them are working. And that includes North America now too.
Awesome. That is so encouraging, because I mean, that's just awesome. I've been hearing reports of our Asian brothers and sisters just taking the reins and going overseas to different places, and that is so encouraging. So if there's any other questions, I will be reading your comments to them when we're offline. These comments are just awesome, that you've left, and so encouraging. For instance, A.D. Alvarez writes, "Our lives are uniquely and personally entwined with the Simmons. My parents' wedding were officiated by Daddy Simons. My wedding were officiated by Reverend Russ. We are in ministry and mission because our lives were affected by theirs. We love this amazing couple, Farmer A.D. and Hazel."
Yay, AD.
We just saw them, last November.
So comments like this and Dell and all those others that I've seen on here, an incredible thank you for sharing this. I will be sure to make sure they see your comments when we're offline. As we close today, I want to remind you that if you're watching this after it's live and you still have comments or questions, you can leave them in the chat. And I will make sure we get an answer to your questions if you have any. Just because it's live doesn't mean we won't respond. So you can feel free to leave whatever you'd like. A recording of this will remain on our YouTube, but we will put it up on the blog later. And I will turn on the comments on the blog post. So if any of you would like to leave comments for Russ and Ramona, you are more than welcome to. The comments will be on. Anna will add the other links so you have more information based on what we talked about today. So I want to thank you profusely, everyone, for joining us. I want to remind you that we do have a live stream tomorrow. It is up on worldventure.com/events. We're going to talk to Amy Smith in Thailand, and we're going to be sharing about an interesting story about a Christian who fled religious persecution. And you'll hear about that person's story and that family's story from Amy tomorrow. And next week, we're having Ordinary People, Extraordinary Places. We have Rich Peterson going to be speaking. We've got Brandon Cossey. We're going to be talking. We got Dr. Jeff Denlinger. We've got all kinds of different guests coming every day next week. So join us for those live streams. Look for it in your emails. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you at the next live stream.